They did not fall. They did not fall. There was no sudden plunge, no violent tumble, no indignant expulsion from paradise. That would be a grotesque simplification, a comforting lie for minds that prefer the idea of an imposed destiny to the cruelty of a free choice. They descended. They descended of their own volition in a slow, deliberate movement, with the cold certainty of those who know what they are doing and accept the consequences. They were not forcibly cast out by divine wrath. They came by choice, a choice that weighed more than heaven itself, a calculated betrayal, a silent pact of ambition and envy. They descended in a procession of light and beauty that was a deceit, with wings that still reflected the Creator's brilliance, words that sounded like the purest melody, and hidden intentions, as deep as the abyss they would later create. They were called the Watchers, because their duty was to watch over humanity, to be silent sentinels on the borders of the firmament, protectors against the encroaching darkness. But instead of fulfilling their sacred mission, they were seduced. Instead of watching, they desired. Their desire was not born of need, but of arrogance. It was the seed of pride that once planted, germinated, and covered their entire angelic nature. The desire for something that did not belong to them, the covetousness of human fragility, which for them represented a freedom that eternal service to the Most High could not offer. Instead of guarding, of protecting the innocence of the creation entrusted to them, they took for themselves what was pure, what was sacred, and what they took, they corrupted so profoundly that the very roots of the world, the most basic foundations of existence, were poisoned. The very structure of reality began to unravel, to bend under the weight of their transgression. The Book of Enoch, with its ancient and haunting voice, tells us there were 200 angels, a legion of traitors led by the most cunning and proud, Azazel. They did not act in isolation. They made a pact with each other, a sworn oath sealed on the cold and imposing peaks of Mount Hermon, a summit that became, through their curse, the gateway to disaster. It was there that, under the gaze of the stars they once served, they made a vow that reverberated throughout all creation. We all swear, and all of us bind ourselves to one another with an imprecation. The curse was a bond of blood and promise, a self-imposed sentence as clear as the fire of the hell they would come to inhabit. If one descended, all would descend. There would be no hesitation, no fear, no possibility for a single one to turn back. It was a pact of loyalty to rebellion, an alliance that ensured the path to perdition would be collective and irreversible. There would be no return. There would be no heaven after touching the earth, for the simple act of touching the soil of the creation that was forbidden to them would forever contaminate their being. And so they touched. They descended, not as angels, but as a light that transformed into shadow, carrying within them the germ of darkness, a stain that could never be washed away. They took human wives, mingling the sacred with the profane, the celestial with the terrestrial, profaning the order of creation. And with them, they generated abominations, the Nephilim. Giants, beings of colossal strength, monsters that devoured everything in their path, animals, men, and in their insatiable hunger, even each other. The earth groaned under the weight of their steps, and the innocent blood spilled cried out for justice, but the corruption of the flesh was just the beginning. What the Watchers sowed on the earth was far deeper. They not only taught men to rebel against heaven, they taught them to mimic it, to imitate its glory in a perverse and distorted way. They gave man the fire of sorcery, a flame that promised power but which in truth consumed the soul, the seduction of mirrors which did not reflect the true image but vanity and lies, the art of war which transformed humanity into a predator of its own kind, the language of the stars, not to contemplate divine order, but to divine the future and manipulate destiny, the writing of enchantments, to bind spirits and subjugate wills. Azazel, the most perverse and cruel of all, became the master of the dark arts. He taught how to make swords, knives, shields, and armor, turning man into a killing machine. And in his most subtle malice, he taught women how to wear makeup, to paint their eyes with antimony, to turn the body into a lure, a tool of seduction and power. Vanity became a ritual, lust became a culture, and violence a religion. The innocent blood cried out from the earth, a cry that rose like dense and disturbing smoke. But heaven, in its terrible and impenetrable wisdom, responded with silence. Enoch was chosen to see and to record this silence and its consequences. One man, a single one, taken between the veils that separate the human dimension from the celestial, he contemplated what most will only see on the last day, when time bends and eternity is revealed. He saw the places where the fallen angels would be chained. They were not cells or dungeons. They were caverns of primordial darkness, eternal pits, bottomless abysses that seemed to have a life of their own, pulsating with a pain older than creation itself. "Here they shall be cast until the great judgment," was the voice that Enoch heard, a voice that was the sound of time running out. The hell that Enoch saw was not made for men. Not originally. It was carved out with a fury and purpose that only the Creator can have, to contain the traitor gods, to extinguish the stars that rebelled against the Most High. A black fire that burns without consuming matter, but that consumes the soul. A prison that speaks, that groans with the pain of its own walls. An abyss that watches and moves as if it had a will of its own, waiting for its prey. There, in that place without name and without time, the watchers scream. Their screams are the only melody that echoes in the darkness, but their voices do not ascend. They do not reach the heaven they betrayed. There, Azazel is remembered by every knife that cuts, every shadow that lengthens, every lie that corrupts. For he is the very embodiment of these things. And the giants they created, the Nephilim, they were condemned to death, their bodies destroyed in the very violence they taught. But their spirits, without peace or rest, wander as demons on the earth, tormenting and devouring humanity, eternally hungry. The eternal hunger they feel is the very root of the desire that devours the world. Hell, then, is not simply a place of punishment. It is a response, an echo of what heaven cannot accept, the final result of divine logic. It is what remains. When grace closes its eyes and justice rises, not with anger, but with an implacable need for order. And the most sinister revelation of all, the most terrifying, hell was not created for you, but you can become like those who inhabit it. Because when man begins to desire what the watchers taught, when he paints his eyes as they taught, when he kills with the weapons that Azazel revealed, when he invokes the heavens as Armaros showed, he becomes part of that accursed pact, the same pact sealed on Mount Hermon, the same alliance with the fall. And hell, that abyss with a will of its own, recognizes its own. Judgment is not just an event that will come at the end of time. It is a mirror that is raised with every choice, every desire, every act. It reflects the soul and separates it, showing who it truly resembles. And if the reflection is that of one of the watchers, the distance between the earth and the abyss no longer exists. Enoch walked between worlds, but not as a tourist or a distant observer. His feet still touched the earth, feeling the solidity of the ground, the dampness of the dew. But his eyes already saw what is beyond the veil, what most mortals could never bear. He was a divided man, a bridge between dimensions. He was taken by the holy angels to places that no man had ever dreamed of, or perhaps had dreamed of, but immediately strove to forget, calling them a nightmare, a darkness that the mind could not process. On his journey in the second heaven, he saw prisons of stars, not as we know them, but angels who had abandoned their posts, imprisoned like living torches, chained in eternity for their betrayal, burning with a light that did not, warm but consumed. It was the image of a celestial being transformed into a perpetual candle, its essence slowly draining away, like a forgotten memory. In the third heaven, the vision deepened. Enoch saw mountains of darkness, masses of solid blackness, and from them flowed black rivers, where time did not flow, but congealed into a dense, viscous substance. There, the fallen angels were upside down, as if the cosmos itself, in its repulsion, had turned them upside down, refusing their presence, their spiritual gravity inverted for all eternity. It was the reflection of their choice. They turned against heaven, and now heaven turned against them. But it was in the fourth heaven that Enoch heard the voice. It was not a voice like that of men, with tones and inflections. It was a vibration that cut the soul, that wounded without touching, that penetrated the essence of being. A voice that was the very authority of the universe, which said, "Say to Azazel, you will see what you have taught. You will contemplate the fruit of your work, but you will not reap redemption." It was a final sentence, a condemnation that was not just punishment, but the terrible certainty of perpetual contemplation. Because hell for the watchers was not just punishment, but the eternal and inescapable contemplation of the corruption they had caused. They would watch the world become lost, the human race repeat their choices, the violence they sowed reaping itself, and they could do nothing to stop it. They were trapped, like spectators in a theater of horrors that they themselves had staged, neither to stop it nor to go back. It was the death of repentance, the death of hope. Enoch was then taken to the judgment hall, a place that transcended human reality. A great glory sat upon the throne, and beside him, books, a library of destinies. Open books, closed books, books with names, dates, sins, books that speak, that bear witness, that forget nothing. There were recorded all the alliances made with the fallen, every enchantment learned, every spell pronounced, every look of vanity that Azazel inspired, every silent murder, every false word spoken in the name of light. The books bear witness, and their testimony is the very memory of creation, a flawless record that cannot be falsified or erased. And then Enoch was taken to the prison of the 7 burning mountains. There lay the principal angels, the architects of the rebellion, the generals of the fall. Their eyes burned with a fire that did not illuminate, a fire that was the pain of their own malice. Their mouths trembled without making a sound, for the voice that once seduced was now muzzled by eternity. They saw, they knew. They perceived the horror of their choice, but they could no longer act. "Here they will remain until the consummation of the sentence," was the voice that sounded. "Until the final fire rises against the heavens and the heavens are shaken." It was a promise of an end that would be even more terrible than the beginning of their fall. And then he saw the valley of terror, an abyss so deep that it seemed the earth had bent in fear. There, souls that belonged neither to heaven nor to hell, trapped between worlds, screamed like wind caught in thorns, a sound that was desolation itself. There were kings, corrupted prophets, fallen priests, and most frightening of all, the men who made pacts with the watchers, men who invoked names they did not know, women who drank from the cup of beauty taught by Ananel, priests who traded the blood of the lamb for the blood of the innocent. They all had one thing in common. They were not deceived. They wanted it. Hell, therefore, is not just punishment for error, but the cruel and implacable revelation of desire. And what Enoch saw was a mirror where every soul was forced to see its true face, its deepest essence. And then they screamed, not from the punishment, but from the horror of recognizing themselves, of seeing themselves without the masks, without the lies they told themselves throughout their lives. Because hell is this, the absence of a mask, eternity without a lie, the nakedness of the soul before itself. And then Enoch trembled, not from fear of the fallen angels who were already condemned, but from what he saw in men, in his own race. Because the same spirit that inhabited Azazel, the spirit of pride and vanity, inhabits the heart of the proud man. Because the same desire that brought down the watchers, the desire for power and control, is what today leads men to build empires in their own names. Enoch fell with his face to the ground, and he wept. He wept for having seen. He wept for knowing that that abyss was not far away, but was right here, inside every heart that aligned itself with the fall. When Enoch returned to earth, his eyes were no longer the same. The vision of the eternal had consumed the vision of the temporal. He had contemplated the very bones of creation, the bare and raw structure of the universe. He had touched the silence of the heavens, a silence that was not the absence of sound, but the overwhelming presence of divinity. He had heard the true name of the abyss, a name that could not be pronounced by human lips without burning the soul. He walked among men, but he no longer belonged to them. For he who contemplates the judgment of angels can no longer be distracted by the lights of palaces, by fleeting glories, by the seductive brilliance of gold. Human vanity and power, to him, seemed like children's toys in the face of eternity. And so, he began to write. The words burned his hands. Each letter was an open wound. Each sentence was a warning that bled onto the papyrus. It was a writing of pain and urgency, a desperate attempt to share the terror he had seen, to pull humanity out of its complacency. But men, they laughed. They laughed at his visions, at his apocalyptic prophecies. They laughed at his warnings, at his words that seemed like madness. They laughed as they laughed at Noah while he built the ark on dry land. They laughed at Elijah when he challenged the prophets of Baal. They will laugh at the end of time at the two witnesses who will rise to warn everyone. Because there is a pattern in human eyes. They prefer the brilliance of Azazel, the false and seductive light of rebellion, to the silence of the Most High, which demands humility and obedience. Enoch wrote that the watchers still weep. But they do not weep in repentance. Their tears are not of contrition, but of powerlessness. They weep because they know there is no return, that the path they chose has no end. They weep as those who know the end weep, but cannot change it, eternally trapped in the consequences of their own choice. He narrated that the righteous angels pleaded for them. Michael, Raphael, Gabriel, Sariel, all interceded before the Holy of Holies, asking for a chance, a pardon, a redemption. But the answer was terrible, implacable, and just. Never again. The earth will no longer be polluted by them. Their names will be erased. Their children will be destroyed, and the men who followed them will drink from the same cup. This is the justice of heaven, not for vengeance, but for equity, because hell is not punishment for those who err. It is the destination for those who choose error as their throne, for those who kneel before a lie and elect it as their truth. And then Enoch saw the throne of the Son of Man. It shone more than 1,000 suns, and all the holy angels prostrated themselves before it. There he saw the Lamb, but not the fragile, submissive, and defenseless lamb. He saw the Lamb with 7 eyes and 7 horns, the one who judges the living and the dead, the one who carries the book with 7 seals, the book of final destinies. And then Enoch understood that all of creation was moving towards that moment, that the screams of the fallen angels, the tears of the prophets, the pains of the martyrs, everything pointed to the same point, the final judgment. And on this day, hell will not just be remembered, it will be opened. And when it is opened, the angels who taught sin will be cast down with the men who learned it. The hidden pacts will be exposed. The words spoken in the dark will become trumpets, announcing what was hidden. The dirty hands that were never seen will shine before everyone, revealing every act of betrayal and malice. Because hell is not darkness, it is revelation. Enoch saw the rivers of fire. He saw the lake that burns with brimstone. He saw the eternal chains. But what hurt him the most was to see human faces among the flames destined for the watchers. Men and women, leaders and unknowns, religious and atheists, all united by one thing, the same spirit of rebellion. Because hell is not made of fire, but of identity. You are what you love, you become what you worship, and in the end, you will be cast down along with what you chose to embrace. Enoch saw the children of perdition, and he wept once again, not just for the fallen angels, but for the humanity that, of its own free will, chose the same darkness. Enoch was taken once more, no longer by holy angels, but by the very final movement of the universe. His spirit ascended between spiraling columns of fire, and his eyes saw the heavens trembling. the fabric of reality unraveling like an old scroll. Time was no longer linear. The past and the future danced around the throne of glory, and Enoch was a silent spectator of this cosmic waltz. And then, he saw what no one should see, the end. But not the end as men think of it, with wars, disasters, and blood, with the spectacle of destruction. The true end was silence, a silence so dense that it crushed souls, a vacuum of sound that was the moment the Most High arose. And when he arises, nothing remains standing. The watchers, in their eternal prisons, screamed in agony. But there was no one left to hear them, for their voices were lost in the silence of judgment. The books were closed with a final sound, an echo that sealed all destinies. The trumpet sounded, not to announce, but to conclude. The stars fell like leaves in a storm, dissolving into cosmic dust. And then, the abyss opened, a bottomless pit, black as the first day before light, a void that had the shape of an insatiable desire. There were cast the watchers, the Nephilim, the kings of the earth, the false prophets, but also cast were those who laughed, those who scoffed, those who pretended not to listen, because omission is also a pact, and the fire was not the punishment. It was the reflection. The fire showed them who they were. The fire revealed what they carried inside. Some burned with the flame of envy that consumed them in life, others with the pride that blinded them, still others with the anger against the very God they once pretended to serve. Hell was not punishment. It was a harvest. And while heaven celebrated justice, the earth wept for those who had left without ever looking up. Enoch saw the number of the saved. It was smaller than he had expected, but their faces shone like polished swords, and each one of them had, at some point, resisted the teachings of the fallen angels. They refused the vanity that Azazel offered. They refused the war that Gadriel taught. They refused the sorcery that Penemu poured out upon men. They erred, yes, for human nature is flawed, but they did not ally themselves with the rebellion. They fell, yes, but they did not make a pact with the fall. And that separated them, that saved them. Enoch fell to his knees. He had seen everything, from the throne to the prison, from heaven to the abyss, from the angels to the mud, from glory to shame. And when he returned, he wrote, "Judgment will come, and those who walked in darkness, they will see the light, but it will burn them. You still breathe. You still have a voice. You can still choose. But know this, hell does not begin with screams, with fire, with chains. It begins with sweet promises, with a light that seduces, with half-truths, with silent alliances. Hell begins when you trade what is eternal for what shines for an instant. It was so with the watchers. It was so with the kings. It is so with the world. And now the question that cannot be ignored: who are you becoming like? Because in the end, hell does not just recognize the condemned, it recognizes the similar. And perhaps you are already being watched.